Hey everybody, welcome to a special presentation of Leading Thriving Cities. My name is Chad Wright. I'm the founder of Forward Partners. Today's guest is Vince DiPiazza. He's the city manager of Uvalde, Texas. And it does not matter where you're from, you know the name Uvalde. That was the tragic location of the school shooting in May of 2022. It's one of the most tragic mass shootings in American history. And from a city manager's perspective, I think there's so much that we can learn from that experience. And now 3 years on, Vince has new perspectives and has had time to process and think through so much of what they went through. There's so much we can learn from that. And I think, quite frankly, that's our responsibility, is to learn from situations like this so we can learn as city managers and public servants, how can we navigate these things in the future? How can we lead through some of the hardest times possible? Thank you for joining us today for this special presentation of Leading Thriving Cities. Vince, thank you so much for being willing to do this. We've told a lot of stories of public service through Leading Thriving Cities, and we were talking before the cameras rolled that you have 40 years of public service, which that's crazy, right? That's going all the way back to the intern days.
It's hard to believe.
It's hard to believe at this point. Right? It seems like yesterday, doesn't it?
In a lot of ways, it does.
It does, and you have so much wisdom, I promise, from those 40 years to be mined and to help us all out. But we're here today specifically because you're the city manager of Uvalde, Texas. And I think when people hear Uvalde, everybody knows what that is, and they know what happened there. And so our goal was to really gather and just have a conversation about leadership through one of the most tragic things that could ever happen to a city. And so, for anyone who doesn't know, on May 24th, 2022, shooter entered Robb Elementary School, and there ended up being 21 victims out of that. And through that time, I've listened to quite a few interviews that you've done, and you talked about how the day itself was just relatively normal for y'all, that even during the event, there wasn't a lot for the city manager to do necessarily other than coordinate a few things.
Yeah, there was kind of an early call, I guess, on my part as far as, is my presence something that's going to be required there. And I've said this before, you may have heard it, a lot has been made of the 77 minutes, but for me, it went by in a blink of an eye.
Yeah.
When I got the call, that something was going on, talked to my police chief who was out of the state.
Yeah.
But he'd already been in touch with his people and,
leading a staff through a tragedy like this, especially one of this magnitude that thank God doesn't happen often. We wish it happened less. How do you lead a staff through that? What did you learn from that?
Well, one of the things, and I don't think this should be a surprise to anyone, is that people will step up when there's a crisis.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of people on the staff who are from the area. They're born and raised in Uvalde, or they're at least from the area surrounding Uvalde or that area of South Texas.
They're deeply connected with some of the
deep
victims.
Roots there, connected with victims. That's another thing about this whole tragedy that is relevant. We might come back to that, but so they're more personally invested really than I am too, and
yes.
Things needed to be done. It's hard to explain the chaos that occurred afterwards. It started with the inquiries from the media, and they were just constant.
You were inundated, weren't you?
Yeah, I mean, for a couple of months it was like that, and then the calls from just interested people who had heard about it, and early on these were the ones that were very empathetic and wanted to help, and everybody wants to help from as soon as the story went out, we got calls and offers for help and for money and all that kind of stuff, flooded with it. And this was going on for a long time.
And your staff, how big is the city staff roughly?
Total, we have 175 employees. I have 30 at City Hall that are, the administrative staff, but that includes, building inspection and utility billing and that kind of folks. So my immediate staff is probably more like 10 people.
And that's interestingly, for a local event, 10 people's fine. For something that is literally a national, if not worldwide event.
National, international. I mean, the calls were coming in from overseas too.
Yes.
And
that's got to be impossible just to process that sheer amount of incoming requests for information, right?
I have to say, the staff, I said people step up, and they did, and they did it often without being directly told to do it. They saw something that needed to be done, and they did it. For instance, people, when a tragedy like this happened, people want to send you stuff. Money is one thing, and we set up to receive money very early.
Yeah,
and I just basically had a conversation with my finance director and said, find a place to park it, and we'll worry about, when we get it, we'll try to get donor intent, and then but park it for now, and I didn't want to turn anybody away. It became a lot more organized later, but but stuff started flowing to City Hall. You can imagine. I'm not clothes, toys, lots of toys.
Oh wow. And I'm guessing y'all don't have a giant city hall anyway.
No, we
don't. You got to find places to put all this stuff.
And so I had a basically a team of 2 or 3 and my immediate staff who was sorting through it all and organizing it, and they were making regular deliveries to the families of the victims. And that was that was difficult for them.
Yeah.
And I learned a little bit about what triggering is. To this day, I have a little difficulty looking at a stuffed animal.
Yeah,
I don't want to make light of it. It's just.
I can imagine.
I've got grandchildren, and we pretty much cleared those out of our house.
Yeah,
strangely enough.
No, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things we talk about a lot, especially in our work with law enforcement, is the system for law enforcement is really not built for humans. It's built for robots. It's built for people that can encounter the most horrible things in life and just go to the next call with no ill effects. And that doesn't work. And I think these tragedies are an amplified version of that. There's no way we can navigate that and not have some sort of damage done. And the damage is a sign that we're human, and it's not a flaw, it's a sign that we're human beings trying to do something really challenging.
I'm an administrator too. I mean, it's I don't when the cops go out and pull bodies out of wrecks, I don't. That's not something I do, and I don't go. With some strange interest in looking at the gory pictures and that kind of thing. So they deal with that kind of stuff, and the people in the fire service too, frequently. But I've always experienced that through secondhand stories.
We
it's a little different.
It absolutely is. We recently interviewed Thomas Hunter. He's an assistant city manager in Pflugerville, and one of the things he said, he tells his people all the time, is you are the backup. You as the city, we're the backup. Nobody's coming to back us up. Like, we have to show up in the worst of times. And it sounds like your people did that incredibly well. They showed up, they were there, they served. The people sorting through clothes and teddy bears and toys and all that, that was nowhere in their job description 2 days before that. And yet that consumed them.
And still did the things that they had to do for,
y'all still had to keep the lights on, to keep everything flowing. Yeah.
That's another thing I've commented on before. I'm sort of strangely proud of the fact that, city services kept going on, even though there was this giant dark cloud hanging over us. Cops still had to be out patrolling the streets, answering the calls that they answer.
You should be proud of that.
My staff did what they had to do. Garbage was collected. Water mains were fixed when they were leaking. All that kind of stuff was still going on, even though we had people in our organization who, I don't think we had anyone who directly lost a relative, but I think we had some uncles and aunts and
when a town of that size, you would have to, right?
So there were connections, and then the staff had. Since these were kids, the ones that had children, they played together. They were on ball teams together.
Yeah, there's probably very few people in that town that were untouched by that. Even just being in Uvalde, being in Texas, it was interesting because I remember when it happened, we kind of sat as a team and said, hey, we probably need to just take the rest of today because that is so close to home. It's one thing watching it happen across the country, but when it's here, it makes a difference, especially for people with kids.
Think, the calls that we got that were offers of help were people that were hurting right along with us, I think.
Yes.
From a distance, perhaps, but probably most of them didn't even know where Uvalde was. Until that day.
Absolutely.
Shortly after that, I was going to get to this, and I've talked about this before too. Maybe I'm naive because I've never been through anything like this, but apparently this is a thing now. The phones were ringing constantly for the next several months. Half of those were not nice calls. They were people ripping us, especially as the law enforcement narrative unfolded. And my staff was, I told them, you don't have to listen to abuse, be polite and just say, end the conversation if you have to. But a lot of them did. A lot of them just kind of took it and tried to explain and
yeah. How did you monitor your staff just in terms of, like, we work a lot with burnout, and I think in normal day-to-day in public service there's an extreme level of burnout. Mm-hmm. You add something like this on that is so tragic and so hard to deal with. Were you able to kind of monitor them and see how they were navigating this, make sure they were doing it in a sustainable way?
Yeah, my HR manager and I were in touch a lot over this time.
Yeah.
And in the first couple of months, there was not a lot of opportunity to pull people aside and do that kind of thing. But, we made, obviously, like all organizations do, we made counseling available. We have the employee assistance plan and all that kind of stuff. And made it clear to folks that, they could take work time to take advantage of this. Plus the resources came to us too. We didn't have to chase them necessarily, which is one of the positive things that resulted from it. So there were ample opportunities. There's another topic for discussion. Not everyone took advantage of them. And
that was literally going to be my next question.
It kind of concerned me at one point, and we took another approach later. Now this is probably a year later when HR manager and I were kind of just talking, and I said, what if we have we'll call it a training session, and it's basically how to recognize mental health issues among your subordinates and coworkers,
among the people around you, but definitely not
indirectly. Yeah, right, exactly. And I think that worked better.
Yeah.
So, and we're still looking at the sort of thing. We did a anonymous survey of our employees a few months ago to just kind of gauge how they were feeling and what they felt they might need in the way of services. I think we've been pretty open about it. And, some of us, like me, have been pretty open about our struggles too. So that kind of helps.
And that's what's needed, because I think often we say you guys should go take advantage of this. But until a leader steps out in front and says, I'm going to go take advantage of this, and I hope you'll all follow me in that, it's rare for that to happen, because we all grew up in a time and a day when that was not what you did. You don't talk about these problems. You just shut up about it. There's something about these tragedies that unites us. I think back to when 9/11 happened, I think is a great example, is for a few weeks, you couldn't turn around without seeing an American flag.
Oh, yeah.
It was on the back of every vehicle. Everybody was supporting one another. I was thinking back through, I worked in newspapers back then, and we would print American flags constantly in the newspaper. And it was this unifying force. And the problem was it didn't necessarily last. And so there is this thing that happens instantly that bonds us together because we've been through something together. But we're always trying to figure out, how do we create environments where it's always that way, where we are always patting each other on the back saying, hey, we got this, let's go. How do we figure out how to do that? Because I think there's something there that if you create that environment, it changes how people feel about everything they do.
It's we use too many sports analogies in our discussions like this. But the team that struggles together develops kind of an internal camaraderie of sorts. And as things came up, so we're getting close to the third commemoration of
we're
tragedy,
right at that third anniversary.
But I stopped counseling for a while, and I started up again recently because I'm feeling it as we get closer to that date.
Yes. I'm guessing this is like a lot of losses. It's this cycle, right? It comes back.
But things come up. We've got lawsuits that we're working on. We've got part of the settlements of the lawsuits involved. I'm probably going a little bit off the side, but we bought into a concept that was referred to as restorative justice, and that money is not the only thing that money is not going to heal anything.
Yes.
What needs to happen is other things need to happen. And so we agreed to some non-monetary things that were important to the families that were affected. So we're working on that too, or getting ready to, because the settlement was announced nearly a year ago, and it still there's still some T's to cross and I's to dot before it's a done deal. But we're getting ready for that. Any event, these things happen. We had the reports came out along the way, first the DOJ and then our own internal investigation, and those were, those had their own, so everything descended on us again, and I'm going to say, oh, here we go again, and my staff's going, hey, boss, we got it.
Yeah,
nothing could. They told me this has kind of become a mantra now. Nothing could be worse than that first few months after May 22.
Yeah.
We've already gone through the worst.
Yeah.
It can't be any worse than that now.
And you're going 3 years on, and you're still crossing some of those T's and dotting some of those I's. Does it feel like there will ever be a point when, okay, this is now behind us and now we're moving into the future? Or is this just part of what is going to define this city for a long time?
I've used the analogy with the worst mass shooting in the United States was in Las Vegas. But when you think of Las Vegas, that's not the first thing that pops in your head, because Las Vegas has a reputation independent of the tragedy that occurred there. Newtown, Connecticut probably doesn't. Parkland, Florida probably doesn't. Uvalde, Texas probably doesn't. So when you think of those places, then they're easy to rattle off because we've repeated them over the years since the thing happened there.
Yeah.
So I think it's time that's going to tell. Eventually there'll be a memorial or two that are permanent. And I would have to say that I think, a good chunk of the town, maybe 3/4 of the town, would just as soon the whole thing went away and they could forget it. And I think, there needs to be some understanding between both sides. The folks that were directly affected need to understand how everybody else feels, and then the rest of us need to understand that it does take time. It was a terrible loss. I don't know how you, I've never lost a child. I don't know how you deal with it.
Well, and I think there's
circumstances.
I was going to say that affects it, because I think there's losing a child. And then there's something, this is horrific. I mean, is the only way to describe it. And I think that magnifies it in a way that we're unable to understand unless we've been through it. And that's hard, because you want to lead through this with a lot of empathy and a lot of grace. And sometimes I don't know if there's a level of empathy deep enough to truly understand that.
I would be lying if I said that all the interactions we've had with the affected parties were cordial and civil, and we were always displaying proper empathy and all that. But it's hard to sustain that sometimes.
Well, if it's two people there, you got two human beings doing the best they can to genuinely lead through something. And you're 3 years into this, and the journey's not over yet. To still be doing that 3 years later, I talk a lot about the fact that leadership in public service, that is sacred work. That is sacred is often reserved for religious overtones, right? Priests and missionaries. There's a definition of sacred that says worthy of awe and respect. And I don't know that you would willingly assign that to the work you do, but it is. And ultimately, to lead human beings on an incredibly difficult journey, that is sacred work.
At the time, when I was deciding what I wanted to be, I got an exposure to the business through my mother that worked for city manager in Richardson when we were there. So I learned a little bit about the job then, and I thought that would be interesting to do. But I was also a sort of a budding believer in those days, much less cynical than I am now.
Something about getting older, we do get a little more cynical, don't we?
And I thought of it, and you've probably heard other city managers and other public servants say this. It felt like a calling. It was a secular calling of sorts, but doing God's work on earth, so to speak. I don't know whether I see it that way anymore, but it's still important, despite the current political culture that doesn't seem to find it very important.
Yes, we've talked about that a lot. The idea that it is sacred work, and we should celebrate being in public service. That should be something we are as proud of as anybody else is proud of anything, because it does matter to so many people. It's what keeps our society moving. It's in a tragedy like this, the aftermath of that, navigating that is so wildly complex. And yet y'all are there every day doing the work, chipping away at it, figuring it out. That matters deeply.
I derive some satisfaction from that for sure, and from the years before that, the other stuff that I've done. But when I got into the profession as a young man, I thought, well, okay, I'm going to do great things for cities, and people are going to say, "Wow, what a great city government we have." But that's not really realistic. And I don't think it wasn't then, and I don't think it is now. And I've told my staff more than once over the years, we do our best work when we're in the background.
Yeah,
I've made the comparison that we're like the operating system that the rest of the community runs on.
Yes,
when you turn on the tap and the water comes out, people aren't going to stand up and applaud. When they go to the park and have a nice time over there, they're not going to say, "Wow, the city really provided a great park for us. Look how well it's maintained." They're going to remember the stuff they did with their families. They're going to remember, giving their grandchildren a bath in the tub, and the water came out. I mean, it's not this. We're not the kind of stuff we do, particularly in smaller towns, is basic.
But
it's basic stuff.
It also means you're intertwined with these people's lives, and there's an important nature to that.
I think you have to be sort of intrinsically motivated for this. Because most of the time you don't hear like I said, nobody applauds you when they open the tap or they flush the toilet and it works, right?
The kudos are an award at TCMA.
But all this stuff happens in a kind of a big black box that nobody really knows about. They don't see it.
And they don't understand it.
And there's an incredible apparatus behind it to get water to your house every day, to get your trash and dispose of it in an environmentally, appropriate way.
So many logistics and professionals and...
I used to teach as an adjunct at Amarillo College when I was out in the Panhandle.
Yeah.
And I'd tell my students, you wouldn't believe how much of my career has been spent worried about poop and trash.
I know.
But it's a big deal. It's a big deal when you have a bunch of people living in a confined area. That's urban life. We have to take care of these things.
It matters a lot.
It's not very glamorous.
No.
And so I take some pride in the fact that it works 99% of the time.
Yeah.
And I always tell them, I don't know if anybody ever talks about the blue screen of death anymore, but that's what I say.
I know what you're talking about.
I've talked about it as an operating system, and I've always told my staff, one of our goals is to minimize the blue screen of death, so that trash doesn't, there's no glitches in the collection of it, and all the other stuff. And when you call 911, the cop shows up, and you don't have to do much more than that. It works by itself. You don't get it didn't happen. The screen's gone blue. What's happened?
Yeah,
crashed. The system crashed. We don't want to have crashes.
One of the things I've heard you talk about too is just the timing of this. We were kind of in the early days of coming out of the pandemic. It felt like, okay, life is somewhat getting back to normal. And as Americans are wont to do, life gets back to normal. So we immediately go back to our bad habits of working way too much, working way too hard. And so your team had navigated the pandemic, which was draining for all of us in so many ways. And then this happens. And as I was listening to you talk through that, I was really thinking through that idea of it matters so much that we care for our teams on a moment-to-moment basis to make sure they're not burning out, because we never know what's around that next corner. And we hope it's never anything like this, but it can be. And so if you had to think about how you care for your team so that they're not, burning out on a regular basis, how do you think about that? Because I was just struck by how much y'all were probably already drained by the pandemic.
There was some of that for sure, and I've told the story before because I told you I don't do much of the rah stuff. Mm-hmm. Well, I did for that too, and that seemed to be an occasion to kind of step out of my comfort zone and communicate in a special way with the folks and I remember I'd sent a message to all the employees, and then when at one of our gatherings, it might have been Christmas party, kind of reinforced that later. I don't know if we had a Christmas party that year, and then that would have been in 2020. Well, a couple of years later, right about the same time of year, we had another similar meeting like that. And I told them before that I thought that was going to become one of the toughest challenges we would have faced was COVID, and here we are. It got worse. And, so how do you do that? You just have to. You have to talk to your people, and they're not always going to spit it out, obviously. Some people are going to be more upfront. There are people that like my own children. I had one that I always knew what he was thinking, and then another one I never knew what he was thinking. And I don't mean that I treat my employees like children, but
listen, it was funny when you and I talked. You said you were going to be very careful not to watch any episodes before we did this.
Yeah, I didn't want to.
Totally makes sense. But
I'm going to go back and listen to him.
Well, what you're going to find when you do is we talk all the time about the fact that we think we're leading adults. We're not. We're leading kids, and we're kids too, right? We're 2 bad days away from throwing a hissy fit.
That's true too.
And so everything in leadership goes back to marriage and parenting, and you can just see the parallels there all the time. So it makes a lot of sense.
Well, and there again, intrinsic motivation is important if you're in public service. Intrinsic being, it's probably not the right word. Internal. You have to be able to feel good about what you're doing, even if you don't hear it a lot from the public.
When this happened is obviously on kind of the back half of your career, we'll say. So you had navigated most of your career having never interacted in any way like this, never experienced anything like this.
Nothing like this. I mean, you have your weather events.
Yeah.
we've had some utility failures that were important over the years, but nothing
like this.
A big wreck on the main drag, something like that, where you had casualties, those significant incidents and tragic ones, but nothing like this. No.
So what have you learned through that process about leading yourself and taking care of yourself?
The support from colleagues was important for me. My family, of course, was very supportive. My wife, I keep telling this story too, because for all these years, she never went to city council meetings. But after Robb, she's been at nearly every one of them.
Oh, wow.
I mean, she's going, that's your thing. What do I want to be at a city council meeting for?
City council meetings are not always the most exciting thing.
If I didn't have to be there, I wouldn't be there either. But so my family, my kids, my daughters-in-law, being with them is obvious. That kind of thing is obvious, I guess.
Yeah.
The first year was so busy. I didn't, I was doing that. I was doing the kind of things that I'm telling you about. But I didn't seek professional help. It was really year and a half, 2 years in before I felt like that was necessary.
Did a year and a half in, did the rush of things y'all were having to take on start to slow down enough that
I think that's what it was.
The quiet started to happen and you started to understand you had more to wrestle with?
There's still a lot of stuff going on, but there was a little more time to think and I was having trouble sleeping and concentrating and those kinds of things.
Yep.
And so
understandably so.
Yeah. And so it became apparent, and I relayed the story about the staff member who said that he could see it.
Yeah.
So I wasn't keeping it hidden as well as I thought I had.
Yeah. Yeah, which is interesting because I think you and I come from similar generations, and yet we were taught the same thing, which is when you experience something, you just keep it inside and keep quiet about it. And ultimately, if you're strong, it won't come out. And the problem is it always comes out every time.
I had dueling parents. My mother was is very emotional still. And my dad was the quiet type. And I just decided early on. I used to tell my kids, get your energy from your emotions, but make your decisions with your rational brain.
Yes.
And I've always tried to follow that same thing. But sometimes, sometimes those emotions spill out and they take over.
Yeah.
When the stress is on, when something like this happens, or other stressful events that could happen in your life.
Well, you say other stressful events. I think what's interesting about this is it doesn't even have to be something of this magnitude. It is simply life. Life is challenging, and we navigate things. We have things that we need to get out, that the pressure will just build until we pop. And so being able to do that, you had to go through something like this to go finally hit a wall and go, okay, I need help. And yet we all kind of need that.
Yeah, and the society seems to be becoming coarser somehow.
It is.
Maybe that's just something an old dude would say, but
no, I think it genuinely is. I think we follow what is modeled for us, and what has been modeled at the highest levels for our country is being cruel. And so we're seeing that over and over again on both sides. And so I think that's natural outcome of that. And it's one that's going to hurt us long term, but we seem to be okay with that, which we'll find out eventually. As you have kind of navigated this, and you're still really in the middle of navigating, I think if we're being honest about it, that ability, are you starting to recognize when the challenges start to stack up, the stress starts to stack up? It's like, okay, now need to get back in with the counselors, time to have another conversation. Are you starting to get good at that rhythm?
Good at it? I don't know if I'm good at it. But I know when I'm feeling it. There again, the signs, sleep and appetite are typically affected.
Yeah.
And then just sort of general irritability. And my wife probably testified to that.
She notices it before you do, doesn't she?
She probably notices it quick. And she's, she's in tune to it, and she's very concerned.
Well, a huge part of our audience is obviously city managers. And nobody ever wants anything like this to happen in their city. But you've learned a lot through this process. What are things that every city manager should be thinking about right now to say, okay, what should be in our emergency plans? How should we be prepared for something like this in ways they may not be already?
We all have emergency plans, and we even look at them once in a while.
we pull the binder down off the shelf.
The giant document that spells out roles and responsibilities and all that. And I think in most cases it holds up. emergency management is an interesting field in itself, and the administration of it seems to me to be heavy into bureaucracy, but somehow we can make it work, and planning is a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. But just I don't think we would have been able to. I mean, I don't think this kind of thing. The response after the event was so overwhelming. I don't think we could have had an adequate plan for it, and a lot of it was on the fly. And we wouldn't have made it without help from external agencies like the DEM at the state level, and I don't know if we had a lot of direct interactions with FEMA, but Department of Justice and another federal agency that's helped us a lot. And is helping us right now in our effort to rebuild the police department. But
I think I remember y'all telling me something about, or you were in an interview talking about, I don't remember if it was the FBI or somebody said, "Hey, we're going to give you a few people just to help. What do you need?" And you were like, "We need you to answer phones. So I need you to."
It was early on when the phones were ringing off the wall. I think the governor sent some National Guard to Uvalde.
That's what it was, National Guard.
They walked to the city hall and said, "What can we do? What can we do?" And
answer phones.
The phones are ringing off the wall, and we stuck them, and they're answering. And these, there again, this was when a lot of those calls were those angry calls, and my own staff was taking care of most of it. And we actually had the city secretaries group in the area. We were able to, I don't know how, on the technical side how it worked, but they were able to help answer our phones remotely sometimes.
Okay.
And the National Guard guys, though, they got their eyes open to what it's like in a situation like that, because they were hearing, these angry callers. I don't know. I don't want to belabor that point, but I must have been naive. I didn't think you'd do that to call up a place that's had a tragedy and pile on, but apparently it's a thing now. We're not the only ones that get that.
No,
it doesn't have to be a tragedy like this. It can be anything almost.
Honestly, I think some people struggle with how to respond. And again, if it's been modeled for us to just call and scream and act like a child to get our way, that's what they're going to do. And,
when your staff is answering the phone and people are telling them, "How can you work for an organization that would employ police officers like that?" or hope next time it's your kid. We've heard that a few times. That kind of stuff and I guess people get their jollies from inflicting that kind of pain on other folks. But that's just a surprise. But the National Guard guys heard that. There's a lot of things managing the help. That's another thing we really hadn't gotten into. The people that came in, and a lot of it, was genuine. A lot of people really wanted to do stuff for us. A lot of people wanted to show up for a little while, get their picture taken, say we were in Uvalde, and then go home. And a lot of the help too came with we want to do something for the children. Lots of people wanted access to the families. Can you get us access to the families? And then going, boy, a ton of folks were trying to get access to the families. It wasn't really our place to protect them unless they wanted it. So we were trying to be, we didn't volunteer. They eventually had to get their own sort of go-between person to handle that for them. But so one of the things I was going to say was, especially among the local entities, the school district, they're in their own silo, the city's in its own silo, the county's in its own silo. We need to open up those silos more often and on a regular basis.
That's interesting.
I keep talking about it as a sort of an operational rapport. And we're all pretty protective. Well, it's not the school district's business to be in our business. But it is, it is for them and for us and for the county. And it's not, there's nothing sinister about it. It's just that you get locked, you get trapped in your own stuff. And
well, we talk a lot about the idea that you get these different silos that build up, and we often talk about it within one organization.
Right, exactly.
But this is within an area, right? These major entities are
we're a town of
tied together.
If you can't do it there, where can you do it? Right.
And so much of it is lack of deep relationship. Like I think of marriage, right? In the seasons when all you do with your wife is solve problems, but you're not doing anything relational, it's not a great season.
Well, all the people, much has been made about the law enforcement response, obviously. That's the kind of the big story coming out of this whole thing. And And what did it end up being? Nearly 400 law enforcement officers from all over the area. Most of them self-deployed. This is a thing too, which needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
And we have had those discussions with the groups that we work with.
Yeah.
Law enforcement officers, they always feel the need. I mean, they jump in and they go without necessarily without instructions to do so or without a call for help.
Yes.
Or they probably had instructions, go to Uvalde, and I've mentioned, and you maybe heard me say that in one of the other interviews, was that, when the call first came in, I thought, well, we got all kinds of the places crawling with law enforcement. We won't, because of the border situation and the fact that we do have a large border patrol contingent in our town anyway, or that work out of our town, and DPS was in the area for the border stuff. So, we won't have any trouble, putting together a response. Well, and as it turns out, that probably was a negative.
Yeah.
There's chaos on the scene.
Coordination
protocols
was lacking,
for whatever reason. I think that was part of the reason why the command structure never really got set up the way it was supposed to have. And so, we train. I've been through training myself, in the in active shooter training, school shooting training specifically, and it's just not the same. The training is still important, but you have to have, I think you have to have serious conversations. You get together for your cup of coffee, but dive deeper,
Yes.
And that's the sheriff and the chief of police for the school district and the chief of police for the city and whatever you got there.
What you want to happen is when something happens, you're working with John and you're working with Jill at the school district, and you know them deeply. You've had dinner with them. And if y'all don't have the practice, the regular ongoing rhythm of connection, and we're working on something together, if we're only just thrown together in an emergency, there's no way that's going to go particularly smoothly.
And a level of trust. You know what people are capable of doing. Well, we have so much to do. We have so much to do, and we're generally, generally don't have the luxury of large staffs, particularly in the smaller places. And it's so easy to kind of kick to the side.
Yeah.
And, you bet, as I've probably done psychologically in my career, that this kind of thing couldn't happen.
That's the thing right there.
It's not going to happen here.
It's very much like you send your teenager out the door and you're like, okay, don't speed, don't do this, don't do this. And in the back of their mind, that's how they're operating. This won't happen here.
And they hear, mom, dad,
And you're here telling everybody it can literally happen anywhere.
So it happened to somebody.
Yeah.
That's why we're telling you this. And, it's hard to sustain that level of seriousness and intensity. I just don't know. That's why one of the things I've sort of preached about is that we have to do more on the front end instead of on the back end.
Yes.
Is the normal response, as it always is in our political culture, is make the laws tougher, put more cops on the streets and in the schools, fortify the schools so that our kids are, basically being educated inside what looks like a prison, or at least feels like one.
Yeah.
What a shame.
Yeah.
When, if you look at the research, a lot of the people that perpetrate this sort of thing, I've been calling them the angry young man, but it doesn't necessarily always need to be an angry young man. And in a few cases, it's young ladies as well, and older people too. But the young people, the young men that cause most of the mayhem in the world.
Yes, that's what the data says.
This is another unsolved problem, I think, in our supposedly civilized society. And the fella in Uvalde, like so many others, he left clues. And nobody thinks, well, okay, he's a bad kid, but he wouldn't do something like that. Yeah. And then a few of them do.
Yeah.
And there's a sort of a narrative, which is really a myth, that when something causes them to snap one day, when in reality they've been planning this stuff for months.
It's usually very carefully, meticulously
this kid
planned.
knew what he was doing, as so many others have done the same thing.
Yeah.
And we have to figure a way to tap into that. And so the field of behavioral threat assessment is developed.
Yes.
It's been around for a while, but we're heavily invested.
It's an entire field now.
Right?
Yeah.
And I would encourage anybody in our business to look at the literature in that there's plenty out there, and
Yeah.
your cops are probably already involved in some of that kind of stuff, but it would behoove us all to learn more about it. And because I think it probably there are places that do this, and they take a very interdisciplinary approach to it.
Mm-hmm.
So the team that looks for this kind of stuff, they get their intakes from educators or family members or whomever is raising the red flag about an individual, and you've got social workers and mental health people and law enforcement and educators on the team. And
we talked earlier about the importance of public service, and I think one of the things the Surgeon General last year released a report kind of sounding an alarm saying, look, loneliness is equivalent to smoking, I think it was like 12 cigarettes a day or 12 packs a day or something. Loneliness is killing us as a society. And I think about those angry young men, right? There's an isolation to that in so many ways. And in public service, y'all create community. You create these opportunities for connection and community. And I think that really matters in terms of our health as a society. Are we able to isolate easily, or are there these great places that it just attracts us to spend time together? You mentioned earlier that there's so much we do on the back end and we need to have emergency plans, but so much of the real work is on the front end. And I'm just fascinated by this idea of creating more ways for our communities to truly connect and to deeply know each other. And I think that's something in public service that it doesn't always fall on y'all's task list, and yet you create the foundations for that connection. I think that's part of that work to be done ahead of time, is how connected are we as a city? One of the things I heard you talk about was the idea that don't make, and this goes for any kind of tragedy in life, don't make any immediate big life decisions, right? And you talked specifically about memorials.
Colleagues.
Yeah. How do you avoid making long-term decisions about things like memorials? Because that is, I would imagine there's a lot of emotion around that.
Yeah. And I would say a fairly serious mistake early on when I listened to some folks in town were complaining about these pop-up memorials that were on the plaza in the middle of town. So if you're a Uvaldean, this space is almost a sacred space.
Okay.
The Uvalde is built on, the downtown is built on 4 plazas. One has the courthouse, one has the city hall, one has the post office, and then there's a green space.
Okay.
And it's at the crossroads of 2 major highways, so it's not as quaint as it once was, but there's a green spot there with a little fountain in the middle, and we have events there. Yeah. It's right across from the Opera House, so there are things that happen at the Opera House that use that space. There are regular gatherings there, but it's the community thinks of that as their space. And very early on, the families that were affected by the tragedy asked the council if they could put a memorial on the plaza, and it was when in maybe the second or third month, and I haven't done enough praise for the council we had then, because I get paid for this.
Yeah.
And they're basically elected volunteers.
Yeah.
And they were out there too, taking all the flack. And, and we had some raucous meetings that were not necessarily the ones conducted in public, where lots of tense exchanges behind the scenes. And there were a few times where I thought they'd fly apart, but they didn't. They held together, and I commend the mayor at the time and Mayor McLaughlin, who's now in the state legislature, and then all the council members that went through this with the staff. But emotions were running high, and I think they didn't feel like they could turn them down. I think I would recommend, if you ever find yourself in that position, try to find a reason to just say, look, thank you. This is a good idea, but we need to wait before we make these kind of decisions. It's too early to talk about memorials.
Yeah.
Within weeks of the event, we're talking about memorials. People were drawing designs and sending them to us, or calling us on the phone. Hey, I've got an idea for the memorial.
Yeah.
I'm going to give money to the memorial. and we were still dealing with the grief.
Yeah.
It's probably not a good idea, in our normal lives to decide what you want on the tombstone until you've had some time to reflect.
Yes.
Reflect on it, right?
Yeah. Where is that
this space,
time?
This sacred space has become kind of an issue locally. So there's still what folks in the business refer to as pop-up memorials, or I think of as impromptu memorials. And they've been on the plaza ever since. And a lot of the town doesn't want to see that. I think everybody should be a little more patient myself. And I realize you don't want to drive through the middle of town and be reminded of this tragedy.
Yeah. But ultimately,
the families don't want their children to be forgotten.
Healing from this is going to take far longer than we think it is, because I don't think it's just like a normal death in the family, which in it of itself takes years. I think it's far longer than that.
Yeah, so try to wind the stream of consciousness back to what I was talking about. I made a mistake by making the decision to try to clean some of that stuff up way too early. Because I listened to some complaining customers from time. There's time to get that off the plaza, and we were only a few months in.
Yeah.
And we thought we were doing it fairly sensitively too. I had a few of the folks on my staff who had the ones that were dealing with the stuff and had a relationship with the families because they saw them on a regular basis.
Yeah,
talk to them and see if they're okay with this. Yeah, we want to clean up the plaza and we thought we had an agreement. We were going to do it together. The staff was going to even be out there when it was going on. We'd be working with them. We thought of it kind of as kind of a healing opportunity. Yeah, but it was way too soon. Dealing with 21 separate families has been problematic because they're not all in accord.
Yes.
For one, they all grieve differently. Yep. And there's a bit of a telephone game going on too, as you do, because the messages as earnest and as compassionate as I know my staff was. Yeah. Some of them got the impression that they were being ordered to remove their things from the plaza when we had promised to box it all up and save it if they ever wanted to access it later. Yeah. But we ended up, somebody complained to the media, it blew up. I took a bunch of flack myself, Yeah. And people wanted, who did this? Who did this? I said, well, I'm ultimately responsible because I made the decision. I wasn't going to throw my people under the bus. And they were upset because, we talked to them. They felt it pretty bad themselves.
Yeah. Through a process like this, do you ever get used to the fact that literally everything you're doing is under a microscope? And I think it normally is in city management anyway, a lot of things we do, but this is to a level that is entirely different.
Yeah, most of the stuff we do, the people that pay attention to city government are a pretty small minority in most communities at most times. Yeah,
unless they're unhappy.
Well, that's what I mean. It's there are a few that are the real earnest, interested people who it's almost like a hobby to them. The regulars, you've always had the regulars that show up to your council meetings, and sometimes they talk, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they have good things to say, sometimes they don't. But that that's sort of normal. And then when stuff happens that causes a reaction, usually a negative one. Yeah. Because people who are in favor of stuff typically don't show up en masse. It's when you've made a decision that's angered folks that they show up. But this was completely above and beyond all that. It was way more people were paying attention. I got emails calling me out for my demeanor during council meetings from people that weren't local.
Oh, wow.
They were flying in from other,
Yeah.
I remember a few choices.
It's not even your choices that are
a smug a-hole, and
it's not even your choices that are under the microscope. It's literally how you're sitting and holding yourself.
That's amazing too, because people were watching our council meetings streaming all over the country, and I got negative feedback. I know the mayor and the city attorney did, others did,
which is amazing because if they could see inside, there's no smugness there about this.
Well,
right?
I don't know. I was called out at a meeting by a stepdad to one of the children who died. We were just they were trying to figure out the supervisory relationships. Who was in charge of the police department? You know? Well, the chief, but he wasn't. When we had somebody acting, well, who's over the chief? Well, that was me, and so. So that's kind of when I came out of the shadows and tried to explain how that was going on. And one young man said, "Is there something amusing about this to you?" I said, "No, I can assure you there's nothing about this that's amusing to me." He said, "But you seem like this is kind of amusing, entertainment." I didn't know where that came from, but
yeah.
It was a crowded meeting. It was one of the early ones, and when it was over, I looked for him in the crowd, and I found him out in the lobby, and chased him down. And I said, look, I mean, if I did something to offend you, I apologize. I didn't mean to.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, frankly, I don't know how to handle this. I was honest with him too. I don't. How do you react in this when people are looking at what your facial expressions are and that kind of thing?
Yeah.
And we shook hands. We had a pleasant conversation. And, again, I don't think we parted as friends, but I think we had an understanding. And he said, we just want to know that you all are on our side.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not sure really what that all meant, but we've had I think we've had a fairly decent working relationship with the family members. They've felt comfortable enough to come to us when they were doing the planning for the commemoration events, and we've made it clear all along that we weren't leading those, but we would be happy to support whatever decided. I think they're having more and more difficulty in figuring out what they want to do.
Yeah,
I think there's been some disappointments and some hurt feelings in the last couple. And they feel taken advantage of as people come in and want to be part of the show.
Yep.
And all they really want is for folks to remember what happened and what happened to their children.
Yeah. This is maybe one of the most complex things I think that anybody could ever have to navigate. And all the feelings involved, all the emotions, all the logic that we're trying to apply to things, and the emotions get in the way. And so I think that we always have to bear that in mind, that it is not an easy thing to navigate. And we are going to, my guess is through that, you can look back and see a lot of things. Hey, I would have maybe done this differently, this differently, this differently. But in the moment, you're doing absolutely the best you can, given everything.
And that's what the counselor told me. You did the best you could. I mean, you can't do more than what you can do. And we're talking about mental health and all that kind of stuff. And for you and for your staff, one of the things I've wanted to do, and I think we've done, and I think I've modeled it by my behavior, is to normalize the conversation.
Yes.
You hear that phrase a lot these days, to normalize the conversation.
Yeah.
If I'm upfront about it, my staff won't feel as reticent about taking advantage of the opportunities that we have. The boss is in counseling, so.
Yeah.
And if we can have more of those kind of discussions.
Makes a difference.
I think so. And that's the objective anyway. Yeah.
That is, to me, that's what strength looks like, is that willingness to say, yeah, I need help, and you do too. And I think that's okay. And that's hard for us to embrace because it goes against everything we've ever been taught.
One of the very few advantages perhaps of aging.
Yes.
Is you don't have to keep up the facades.
The ego starts to shrink.
You've seen it, you've done it.
Yeah.
You have a sense of history, which I didn't have in my younger days. And I talk about it a lot, and I have a lot of stories, as my staff knows. But it's all to say that Okay, I'm a big Star Trek fan, so this is
I'm with you on that.
It's been both a blessing and a curse. In the last movie, Spock tells Captain Kirk, "You have to have faith that the universe will unfold as it should," and that's what I think about when I think about the interactions between younger staff and older staff.
It will all work itself out.
It has done, as you pointed out. This kind of thing has been going on for generations, and will continue to go on, and it's part of the evolution of human society, and is essential to that. Frankly, that the old ways be challenged, and it's like a succession. We learned about paradigm shifts too. Right? It's like a succession of paradigm shifts, social paradigm shifts that are prompted by young people asking questions. And we need that, even though we get irritated to hear them.
Yeah,
and everything was better in the old days, right?
Those magical days.
Wasn't necessarily. It's a mixed bag, like anything else. Some stuff was better, some stuff not. As society advances. And this was what we're doing in our business. This is contribution to the advancement of society in one form. It's at the local city government level.
Yes, it is. That's where it really happens.
It's all part of the creative evolution of human society.
I love it. Well, I want to close out with one last question. I've heard you say that closure may or may not actually be a thing. And I kind of agree with you. I don't know that anything is ever fully closed. And so you're now almost 3 years out. By the time this airs, it will be 3 years out from the tragedy. What has that 3 years of perspective given you? How's your perspective changed, or what do you believe now that maybe you didn't believe in the immediate aftermath? What have you learned?
What's important? What's important in your life?
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, I may have become less patient to some of the stuff that we have to deal with on a daily basis. It's okay. I talked about how we're proud of the fact that we picked up garbage in the waterworks and all that kind of stuff, and it's transparent to the end user because it just sort of happens automatically. But by the same token, the world didn't end if we missed your trash pickup that day. And once upon a time, I felt it stronger than I do now, and I've probably been more sympathetic to the complaint. But I mean, it's probably because it's that cloud of the tragedy hanging over our head. You're worried about this. This is what I should have been thinking when the people were complaining about the memorials on the plaza.
Yeah,
I should have said, "Look, I understand, but this is not the time to do it." I should have realized that I was stepping off into an area that, given the context we were operating in, was not important at the time. I probably lost a little credibility with the families that day. Hope I've gained it back, or at least some of it. But yes, it puts things in perspective, which is another thing you do, and as you get to the close of your career and eventually your life, you try to put things in perspective.
I think it is these events that, is as horrific as they are a good reminder that sometimes as a society we need to understand what does truly matter, to be able to hug your kids knowing that other people can't.
You were talking about closure. That was the thing. And I think that's Uvalde still needs to learn this, because I think we would get along better if everybody else that's tired of being reminded, and we have murals. We have murals of those kids on the walls of our downtown buildings. You can't ignore it when you walk by. I don't think community wants to be known for that, but it did happen. And I think we all need to realize that that's the case.
Yeah.
And be a little more patient, be a little more understanding, and think about what's important. Is keeping your space, your sacred space, clean the most important thing? I get that. I get why that's an issue, but I might probably get in trouble for saying this now, but but I think it's true. That's another thing that happens as you get older. You can sort of speak your mind more and not worry about career repercussions.
Yeah.
I think the town needs to realize and to really think about what happened, and how we should move forward from here, and not be so angry about the fact that it did happen, because you can't escape that.
Yeah.
So you got to figure out how to come to terms with it somehow.
Yeah.
And I think we'd all benefit from some patience.
It's interesting. I feel like in the moment of a tragedy like that, and immediately afterwards, there is a bit of clarity, right? There is in sharp focus, here's what matters. Here's what is truly important in life. And I think over time, that clarity probably fades. Over time, I think in some ways perspective is really good, the perspective of distance and getting, some distance from something, but some of that clarity we need to hold on to, of what matters and what should we be mad about and arguing about.
And probably one of the things that's been a problem for us is that, we move on. That's another thing that seems to happen in modern society, because we have access to all kinds of information. We move on. The attention that you got moves faster.
Yes.
I mean, D-Day used to be a big thing, right? For the generation that went through it. D-Day.
Yeah.
I know Pearl Harbor Day is really what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
And that stays in the memory of that generation. We have our 9/11, but that seems to have faded faster. I mean, there's something.
Was that
something different?
Was that the last major event that truly brought us together, unified
I
us,
think so.
and is like, since then something happens. Well, we focus on that for that 12 hours, and then something else happens
and
the
then we
next
talk
day.
about, when the next shooting happens,
Yeah.
and it's become sort of an inevitable event. We've accepted it in a way, which seems to me to be totally wrong.
Which is fascinating, because you talk about history. If we went back to even the 90s, before this started happening, and said, hey, there's going to be a time 30 years from now when this is normal to us and we're willing to do nothing about it, it would blow people's minds.
We have people right now that deny the Holocaust ever happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
What kind of world are we coming to when those things don't stay in your memory? So I think Uvalde needs to stay in our memories.
I think you're right. I think when we lose track of history, we repeat it over and over again, the mistakes. And I think this is why I deeply appreciate you, because I actually do want to have you on again and talk about the previous 40 years before Uvalde happened, the 35 years, because I think there's so much wisdom to mine there.
I could tell all those stories.
And this is the thing that we need to remember, as hard as it is. We need to talk about this and continue to understand what we can learn from it, because I think that's part of our responsibility as leaders, is to continually understand what has happened, so we can make sure we can lead through the next thing, or even maybe, God forbid, we actually make society a little better and we learn from our mistakes. That would be wonderful if we could figure that out.
I think we really need to recover the notion of society and the commons, as it were, that there is something that, there's something to that, rather than all the sort of the isolation that we put ourselves. If we're lonely, it's not because there's nobody out there. The country is nearly doubled in my lifetime. The population has, and so the people are there. So we're just not connecting like we used to.
Yeah.
Remember the sociologist who did the book about bowling in America or something like that. I can't remember his name. Talked about the decline in the number of bowling leagues as an indicator.
I have heard of that. Yes.
I can't think of the man's name. That came up. I think that came up in the course. I was teaching government and college, but it was an analysis of that sort of thing. Yeah. It wasn't just the bowling, I don't think, but but that kind of thing. You look at the sort of the community organizations. There's the like the Lions Club and the Rotary and all those that used to be pretty large and had a lot of the local leadership was either affiliated or came from there. Our towns have changed.
Yeah.
What's a local business anymore? We all have a handful of them, but then we've got, sort of the Walmartization of America too. And the managers of those stores come and go. But it used to be the local banks and the local merchants.
Mm-hmm. And we all bowled together.
Of leadership in the community. And we bowled together and went to church together, right?
This is, and I want to close on this, but
sure.
It goes back to this idea they've talked about, where we started falling apart politically, was when the congressmen stopped living in Washington. Because before, they would live in Washington, their families were there, they would sit and argue all day about something, and then they would go sit at their kids' baseball game together.
Yeah.
And they would go to church together, they would eat meals together. And then it became kind of in the 90s, we're going to fly into Washington, do what we need to, then fly back home and raise money. And that was where everything started to break down, because kind of like we talked about with the county, the school district, the city, we need to be building relationships as a foundation to really get things done together.
And there again, it's like I said earlier, if you can't do it in a town like Uvalde or Dumas or any of the other
where can we do
towns, where can you? And
yes.
And you've heard the adage, you can't fight City Hall. That's an old saying from way back. But it's been my experience in the smaller towns that you can very well, you can easily fight City Hall, or at least you can easily influence the decisions that your city government makes. Because these guys and gals that are on the council, they're local people. They're in most small towns, they're volunteers.
Yeah.
Even in the larger towns, they may make a few bucks, but it's not a living wage in most places, right? So they've all got other things. They're occupied. You see them at the grocery store. We got Walmart and H-E-B in Uvalde, and so you're going to see them at one of the other places. You're going to be sitting next to them in church. You're going to see them at the kids' ball games. All that kind of stuff happens, and so it's been my experience that most city councils are, they're willing to basically fall all over themselves to take care of whatever it is, the problem that you bring to their attention.
Yeah,
and. Somehow we need to strengthen that whole idea and I don't know. Maybe there's just a new way that we don't see yet that's gonna
I think it's going to be willing. It's going to take leaders who are willing to do the hard things necessary to actually create sustainability is what it's going to take. And again, I think we've somehow devolved into two old guys complaining about the world,
funny.
but I think that's
about the passage of time and such.
But I think that's the truth.
A lot on my mind. I'm a little older than you are.
Yeah, but I mean, even then, we are united in the fact that we need leaders who are willing to do hard things. They're willing to say no when they need to say no. They're willing to say, hey, we need to get here, and it's going to take a lot of pain. Let's go. And that is what is lacking. There's no political appetite for that in most leaders, which means we're lacking leaders. So I don't know that we're going to solve that, but at least we see the problem. Well, listen,
I'm going to rely on the young people, and you've talked to a few of them on your podcast, and hopefully we will have provided at least the framework and the foundation for them to. Yeah. I feel guilty as a boomer that I've allowed this to get out of hand. I feel like I should apologize to my children and my grandchildren because I think we screwed up the world for them. But
listen, Vince, I appreciate you so much for being willing to do this. Again, I think there's so much wisdom that you can share that is so helpful for people, and so that's going to impact people that you may or may not ever even meet. And so I deeply appreciate that. It means a lot that you're willing to do this. So thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity to yak a bit about some of this stuff. I hope somebody finds it useful.
It absolutely will be. Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining us for Leading Thriving Cities. We are dedicated to giving away everything we teach, and importantly, everything we learn while we're on the ground partnering with cities to develop healthy leaders and thriving teams. You can find all of that leadership development content on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Just search for @ForwardPartner. You can also find more information about what we do at forwardpartners.net.